Chair, make it 4 o'clock, and I've just started the recording.
Lovely, thank you very much, Mark. Yep, I do too. Just gone 4. Afternoon, everybody. I shall do the formalities. May I remind everybody present that the meeting will be recorded via the internet and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a committee member wishes to speak, please can they put their hands up if they can be seen, or use the hand up option in the application. If any party has difficulty hearing or being heard, they should let the chairman or the Democratic Services officer know as soon as is possible. If they have a webcam, we suggest they try shutting this off in order to help the broadband width so they can at least be heard. If required, participants can dial into the meeting using a telephone. The telephone number has been provided in the meeting invite. If for any technical reason any person party to the proceedings is unable to hear, then the hearing will be adjourned for a short time to allow contact to be made. It is important to remember that all parties must hear all of the proceedings unless they decide to leave. So unless they've heard all the proceedings, they won't be able to vote on that matter. Please ensure that all debate is raised verbally, not via the chat function, for the sake of the recording. The chat function may be used to highlight any technical issues and grab the attention of the chairman or Democratic Services officer only. The allocated public speaking minutes will be strictly adhered to, so as soon as time is up on your minutes, whoever's speaking, you will be cut off. And I believe they all are 3-minute terms today, yes?
That's correct, Chair.
Yeah, they all are. So without further ado, we will go into the meeting, and I will take apologies for absence. Mark has told me that Margarita Wright has given her apologies. Any others? No? Full house apart from Margarita, good. Okay. I haven't seen, is Gordon on? No. You probably
don't believe so, Chair.
He may turn up shortly. Okay, so agenda item 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 24th of February. Are you happy that I sign these as a true record?
Move and note, Chair.
Thank you. No one got any issues? Thank you very much. Right, item 3 is declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations? Don't see any hands up coming, and I don't hear anything verbally. Okay, I will take that there are no declarations. Okay, the first item on the agenda is the Guide to Public Speaking at Planning Committee. I believe, Marcus, do you want to say anything about this, or are we just going to ask people to note the report?
I think Mark is going to present it.
Oh, right. Okay, Mark.
Apologies, Chair. My colleague Amy Redmond was going to just go briefly through the report before, obviously, there are any questions or decisions from the committee. Amy, are you on?
I am, Mark. Thank you very much, Chair. Hello, committee. You obviously have had the papers in advance of the meeting this evening, so I'm not going to go through the report verbatim. I just want to highlight the context briefly of the report. So the current public speaking guide has been published and has been in effect since February 2015. This report is asking for your opinion as the planning committee, so any amendments or comments can be incorporated into the proposed update, which is Appendix A to your paper today, in order for us to take it to full council for ratification. So there's 3 appendices with your report today. Appendix A is the proposed update, and the sections highlighted in purple are suggested amendments. Appendix B is the current version of the guide, and Appendix C is the current remote meeting procedure as a result of the national pandemic. So Appendix A would be the document that we were hoping to publish, and that's what I will be amending based on any comments you may have this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I see Mark has his hand up. Mark Wilson, would you like to Speak, Mark.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear us? Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, loud and clear, Mark.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. There's a couple of concerns I have in relation to this document, in the sense that there's no real guidance for using Teams for members of the public on here. We got stuff on the go-to function, but it doesn't seem to be anything on Teams in relation to this. And since people will be using Teams, I think that is particularly important, especially for members of the public here, as a guidance. And I think going forward, that's likely to be a scenario for the not too distant future. And secondly, I want some clarification about local members and their eligibility to vote if they are on the planning committee. There does seem a bit of confusion in this document about whether they can or cannot vote. I mean, I take it that they can, of course, so long as they have not already stated that they are in favour or against a particular application and they haven't predetermined their viewpoint. But I do want more clarification about that point going forward. So I want to make it absolutely crystal clear that if you are a local member and you haven't stated a predetermined view, or you have said publicly that you're not going to be bounded by that predetermined view, then are you eligible to speak and to vote at a particular meeting?
Well, I'm fairly sure I can answer that clearly. If they're a member of the planning committee, they would be eligible to vote. If they're not a member of the planning committee, they wouldn't be able to vote on planning committee. I don't think there's any different to that, James. That would be the case, wouldn't it?
I think that's right. I think the difference in the new report is that basically what members can do is choose to, as members of the planning committee, can opt to speak as a local member rather than as a member of planning committee.
Yeah.
So they all it'd be similar to a situation where a councillor wanted to it'd fundamentally be where a councillor wanted to express a view either way generally, or to represent the local ward, but in expressing that opinion, they would then not be able to vote on it, as opposed to speaking to the matter as a member of the planning committee in a more general sense.
Okay, so just to clarify that, James, if I can respond, Jonathan.
Yes.
So what you're really saying is, if you said at a meeting that I'm speaking on behalf of my ward, I'm speaking in capacity as a local member, even if I'm a member of the planning committee, then you will not be eligible to vote.
Yeah, but if you need to use your head a little bit here. If you want to vote, you say you don't say I am speaking as a member, as the ward member. You say you are. You can state you're the ward member, but I am speaking on this as a member of planning committee. You just have to clarify either way whether what you're saying is as a member of planning committee or whether you're just saying as a local member.
I think that would be, John, you're making a really good suggestion there. I think that should be in the guidance, because I think that needs to be much clearer than it is at the moment.
Okay, I'm sure Amy's picked up on that, and we could get a slight amendment, Amy.
Yes, of course, Chairman, that's no problem at all. The only other thing I would add is obviously in terms of in terms of declarations for members, obviously that would be dealt with on a one-to-one basis, following advice on Section 18 from Debbie Miles from our Section 1 from our officer there. So
Legal department.
Yes. So obviously the guide is written predominantly from the point of view of the public. So I take on Councillor Wilson's point completely. And just to briefly, if I may, Chairman, touch on Councillor Wilson's first point with regards to guidance for using Teams. Since September, when our virtual meetings resumed for the Planning Committee, public speakers are offered a copy of the guide and are also offered a Teams trial, if you like, in advance of the meeting, when the Democratic Services Officer makes contact with them following their registration to speak. The remote meeting procedure, which you've got at Appendix C, when it was published, was obviously collated with regards to the GoToMeeting platform that we had at that time. Obviously, with the guide being updated, our remote meeting procedure would also need to be updated, and we would be updating that with our corporate platform, which, as you're aware, is Teams.
Lovely.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Okay, I will move on now. I've got Vince Driscoll and then Ian Johnson wants to come in. So Vince first, please.
Hi, thanks, Chair. My only concern is about the site visits, really. I mean, we've been told all along that we could actually pop along on our own time and visit these sites, and now it appears on page 5 that that's no longer the case. And I'm also concerned about going forward once the restrictions are lifted. Will we be returning to site visits? Because I think they're a very important part of planning applications.
I can assure you that as and when we can, we will be returning to do site visits. You're
Okay.
right; they are a very important part, and sometimes you can, you just can't glean the information you can by looking at it.
Okay. But what about the moment? Are we not allowed to visit places at the moment, or
The guidance,
make our own site visits?
yeah, the guidance is that we shouldn't. So our guidance to you as members of planning committee is that if you would like to go and have a look, you're quite welcome to do so, so long as you comply with the current COVID regulations. But to have an organised physical meeting on site, we're not allowed to within the current guidance.
Okay, thank you.
As soon as we are, as soon as we can, I can assure you, I think that, you know, site visits are integral and important. So we will be getting back to it, but I don't see it happening for a little while yet.
Okay, cheers, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. And Councillor Johnson, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was a little bit confused as I thought we were talking about the guide to public speaking at planning committee rather than site visits. I thought that was a bit off topic, interesting, but off topic. I think there's a lot of improvements within here compared to where we have been. I mean, obviously, this is something that's now been in place for, what, 5.5 years. You know, I'm glad to see that we've considered some of the further options. I remember Councillor Hodges in particular lobbying for this, you know, a long time ago. The query I had was regarding town and community council representatives. And the suggestion here is that I'm glad to see them included within here. I don't know whether I need to declare a level of interest like everybody else. I'll try and avoid that. But a question here really is how we determine how that works with the town and community council. Is that do we only accept it if the town and community council themselves formally recommend a speaker? There are a number of people who will be town and community councillors who will have opinions on things and will have voiced that at various points and want to put themselves forward. Is this only therefore as town and community council representatives, formal nomination? Does that mean that we should also really have a process for informing a town and community council that something is on the agenda? Because obviously there's very short notice. They might not have a meeting between the Wednesday where we send this out and the Wednesday where we have it. And I just want to consider, you know, sort of the process for ensuring that is done in a way that town and community councils feel they're involved. Perhaps, and I don't know about the timing, is this also something that should maybe refer to community liaison as well, or at least send guidance for town and community council representatives developed? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I do agree with you on a lot of your points there, because there is confusion. But as far as I'm concerned, and James will pick me up now when I'm probably wrong, the public speaking part as it relates to planning committee, if they are nominated by the town and community council to speak officially, yes, that would apply. If they are a town and community councillor and have not been nominated by the town and community council, or don't have authorization to speak by the town and community council, they can't. That doesn't apply to them. They would just be a member of the general public, as far as I'm concerned. James, would you like to clarify if I'm wrong on that?
I think that's right. I think that's the intention, is that it would be a nominated person from the town. Obviously, then I appreciate Ian's point in relation to the actual logistics of the timings of that, and how the town and community councils kind of formally put someone forward.
Well, I do.
It may be that we need to think about.
Is it, Chair? Is it something that might be useful to either be referred in one format or another to community liaison or to consider that a different, something might need to be put in place just to do this. And it's better for TCCs to make that decision for themselves as to how they might consider doing this.
Maybe so. I think that's quite a good idea to let them debate it. I mean, my thought is that any nominations for town and community councillors to speak should always come through the clerk of the town and community council, not via an individual. And I would like to think that as the clerk is the proper officer, that they would know whether that councillor has the authorization or not. I don't know, but I think it's a good idea that you have suggested that community liaison perhaps have 10 minutes or whatever considering this. But that would be my suggestion, that we tell town and community councils that if they want an official speaker to planning committee, that they need to be authorised and nominated through the clerk of the town and community council. Any further thoughts on that?
If I may, Chair, just add to that, as part of the general agenda distribution, all town and community councils, the agenda hyperlink is emailed to all town and community council clerks, so they are made aware of what is on the agenda, and therefore instigating if they do want to nominate a particular representative. But obviously the public speaking guide, we wouldn't want to disfranchise any member of the public speaking who wish to do so. So they may be just generally registering as a member of the public rather than a formal rep of the town and community council. But we can certainly, as Democratic, send out an email to the clerks, obviously once the guide is in place, to remind them of being able to nominate a single person from the council if they should show wish. I don't believe we have a community council meeting community liaison meeting, prior to when we're hoping to get this guide published. So I just need to clarify with the committee whether they are happy to send the report to full council as amended with your comments today, and then share with community liaison committee after that.
Yeah, I think I've got a few more people want to come back in, but just on this point, which I think is a critical one and has been abused on times, I would like some form of a policy in there before it goes to council, that the speaker is nominated or recommended directly from the clerk of that council, because we have had abuse of it in the past. Individual councillors saying they're representing the views of the town and community council when they're not. So I think we need some form of protocol to ensure that they are, doing what they say they're doing. Are you happy just to try and put something like that in there, Amy?
Absolutely, no problem.
Great. Okay.
Chair, one quick suggestion. I don't know, obviously, whether this would be relevant given the timescales, and I can understand what Councillor Johnson's reference to. The difficulty of getting somebody in quickly to speak. Some community councils have designated or delegated responsibility to planning representatives on there, and it might be that a part of advice around this to community councils and town councils, they could consider, if they haven't already, that there's a delegated representative who can act if the town council or if the clerk agrees, can act to speak on behalf. So that's one option if you have a short notice that you could think about doing, but just a suggestion. Okay,
thank you, Marcus. Amy, Eddie, you've got your hand up, and then Mark wants to come back in.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, it's a valid point about the town and community council. We are aware as councillors there is a code of conduct, isn't it? That councillors can't speak on behalf of their own authority unless they've been given permission to, or unless they state that it is their own personal views. So I think that explains that a little bit, but you're quite right. We've had instances in the past where councils haven't complied with that. So yes, each of the town community councils have planning subcommittees or whatever, and it's for them to nominate. And I would agree with you. It's more likely those subcommittees would have a representative via the clerk. And that would, for me, it's an easy process. I don't think that's something we need to start going into great depth. It's just an awareness that maybe a one-liner in this guide, just to state that there's an expectation that there would be a nomination from the clerk would probably suffice. Otherwise, as you say, this is going to be kicked down the wind.
Lovely. Thank you, Eddie. And Mark, you wanted to come back in quickly.
Yeah, just quickly. There's some very good points being made about consultation with town and community councils. But remember, the problem with town and community councils, they all are very different from each other. They all have different forms of delegation. And that's part of the problem here. I mean, if I think about Penarth Town Council, which I am a member, is that we have 3 levels of delegation. We have delegation to the town clerk, we have delegation to the chair and vice chair of planning committee, and then we have delegation to the full committee. Now, we only meet at the moment once a month. Now, some councils may meet once a fortnight, but some community councils may only meet once every 3 or 4 months. That may mean they miss their opportunity to really feed back their town and community council's views to the planning committee. This needs to be more regularised, I feel, because I think many smaller communities are kind of disenfranchised by this system.
I mean,
in the old days, can I finish, Jonathan?
Yeah.
In the old days, of course, in the good old days, we used to have planning lists. So every week or every fortnight, we have a planning list with relevant wards on it, and it was good. The sort of thing they're still doing in Cardiff, and I still think we should be doing it in the Vale, because it makes people much more aware what's coming. And that list was also given to the relevant town and community councils, and I would like that to be reintroduced. I mean, I don't see why that can't be done. All right.
It's all there online. Every application is there online. And
yeah, it's a pain. It's a pain to get to, and it's not very accessible. And I can speak to that as experience.
I disagree on that point, but we're not going to have an argument on that here.
No, we're not.
But I seriously think that, you know, the clerk as a proper officer, whether they're Penarth Town Council or whether they're St Nicholas Town Community Council, the clerk is still their proper officer. And I think if a nomination comes through the clerk, I think it is a much safer nomination than if it is just an individual saying they are representing. So if we could just pop it in there that it comes through the clerk, it clarifies it for everybody. We know, you know, our democratic team would pick it straight up. If it hasn't come through the clerk, they would go back to them and say, yes, that's fine. If you want to speak as a community councillor, could you just get your clerk to clarify this for us? And we know then it's black and white, you know. So Ben, you wanted a quick word on it?
Yeah, I would just move the report. I don't think. I think that the way that they instigate how they want to come forward to us through their clerk is sort of for them, and maybe they can debate the point in the next community liaison committee. I don't see it as a reason to delay getting this ratified at council. So I'd move that as amended, we go forward with this report to council, as long as Amy's got all the points that she thinks need to be there. If there needs to be a slightly different moving, but I'd say move on.
Lovely, right. Amy,
second with the amendments, Neil.
Right, thank you. Amy.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I will. I've made a note of all of those comments. Obviously, I will update Appendix A, and you will see the updated version as presented to full council.
Super, thank you. So, everybody happy with that? Then we've had a mover and a seconder. We've had a good old debate on it, and right, we will sort that one out. And thank you all very much on that. So that takes us to planning applications. And the first planning application is 2019-00968 out Porthkerry House. Now Marcus is going to lead us through this one, so I'll hand over to Marcus, and then after that we have a public speaker, I believe, on Porthkerry House. We will come to the public speaker after that. So Marcus, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. And I think Ian is displaying the plan, so thank you for that. Yeah, this is an application that relates to Porthkerry House, Porthkerry, and in particular to the swimming pool, which is located to the southwest of the dwelling, edged in red on the plan you can see in front of you. Retrospective consent is sought for the retention of a building that's being constructed over the top of the pool. There is a pool house and a raised terrace to the rear of that pool house. The issue really relates to the construction of the raised terrace, which has been built around a very nice home oak tree, which actually has been deemed to form part of the ancient woodland which surrounds Porthkerry House. There has been a tree preservation order placed on this tree following the works that were commenced there without permission. There is real concern that what has been done will damage the tree beyond, or certainly will kill the tree in due course if it hasn't seriously damaged it already. Just a couple of key points around this. Obviously, we've looked at the proposed development as it stands, and if were the tree not part of it, I think the issue would be completely different. However, unfortunately, the way it has been constructed means that the tree is right in the middle of the terrace and is completely surrounded, as shown by the photographs Ian is highlighting. We have received a complaint from the Woodland Trust due to the impact on the tree, and our own ecologists and tree officers are concerned that with the impact that will have on the tree. So just to draw this description to a close, it is recommended that the application, which includes the pool house and the raised area, is refused, but that enforcement action is authorised in respect of the raised deck area, raised patio area, which has the impact on the tree. We haven't recommended that the pool house is taken down. That actually has no real negative impact as far as we're concerned in terms of visual impact or any other impact. So it's solely in relation to the raised deck area. Okay.
Thank you, Marcus. Okay, so we have a public speaker, Mr. Chichester. If you would like to turn your camera on and your microphone on.
Hi, good afternoon.
So you probably heard my spiel earlier on. I will be pretty strict on your 3 minutes. Mark is going to be my timekeeper. So I will hand over to you now. And once you start, you'll have your 3 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rob Chichester. I'm a director at C2J, Chartered Architecture and Town Planning Practice. I'm here today to represent my client, Mr. Howes, in regards to a retrospective application before the committee. It is key to note that the applicant was originally under the impression the construction of the pool house and enclosed terrace fell within his household permitted development rights. On discussions with the agent on another matter, it was brought to the applicant's attention that the planning consent would be required for the works. In good faith, the applicant submitted a retrospective application to regulise the development. Again, when undertaking the development before the committee, the applicant was not aware that the isolated tree in question was located within the ancient woodland. The tree was also not the subject of a TPO order at the time. Even without the knowledge that the tree was not in the ancient woodland, the applicant sought to retain the tree and integrate the tree within the terraced area, given its amenity value. During the lengthy application process, the LPA requested that the applicant provide an arborist report. The arborist report clearly identifies that whilst unknown, significant damage to the T1 may have occurred. However, mitigation measures were put forward to minimise the impact. In the conclusion of the arborist report, the professional opinion of the arborist is that subject to the mitigation methods, there is a moderate chance that the tree would tolerate the works and adapt in time. The Woodland Trust has quoted the submitted arborist report out of context and makes no reference to the mitigating proposal. Within the officer's report and conclusion, the wording specifically states it is extremely likely that if left in situ, the development would result in the tree dying. To our knowledge, the LPA have not undertaken a separate assessment of the tree. There is no evidence with the only relevant qualified document, the submitted arborist report, to suggest that the retention of terrace would result in the tree dying. On the contrary, the report states that there is a moderate chance that the tree would tolerate the mitigation works and adapt in time. In light of the above, it is considered that any future major disturbance works associated with removing the terrace would have an adverse impact on the tree. It is therefore considered the most appropriate form of action would be to follow the professional evidence contained within the submitted arborist report and retain the tree in situ and follow the recommended mitigation works. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. You caught me out there because you were under your 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
No problem at all.
If you can just stay there for a couple of seconds while I just ask if anybody has any points that they need clarifying from Mr. Chichester's talk. I don't see any hands up or anyone waving. Oh, Ben Gray. Ben, you have a clarification.
Yeah, just a brief clarification, Robert. You talked about the LPA consultation. So did they attempt to get an application before building, or is this the retrospective application you're referring to? Just to clarify that.
Yeah. Yeah, please, Rob.
Sorry, in terms, so the application has organically grown from, we just went to site and saw the building works and notified the client that they weren't under permitted development and said that realistically, although it's isolated, no one would have seen it, he should get planning consent for that. That has borne the application in front of you here.
Yeah, that's fine. It's the way you refer to it. I just wanted to clarify we're talking about the same application. That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. I don't see any other points then, so thank you very much, Rob. Could I ask you to disappear now? You're more than welcome to stay on and listen, but if you could turn your mic and camera off, and we will, I think I'll hand back to Marcus just to see if he wants to come in on any of the points that they raised, and then we'll open the debate.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, obviously, the arboriculturist report that's come in with it has highlighted a moderate chance of the tree being retained, with works being proposed around that tree. I think our ecologist has made some comments on this, but in any event, it seems the most likely scenario is that if the decked area were removed from completely around, or the patio area were removed completely around the tree, it has a much greater chance of survival. And indeed, were the tree to fail in due course, it is covered by a tree preservation order, and any replacement tree that would be required to be planted has a much greater chance of survival if it's not included within a patio area. So I think what I would say is that we have, obviously this application has been in for some time, there have been some negotiations, and we have tried to work with them to try and suggest that they don't extend the decked area around the tree. That would remain our view. Obviously, we've asked for it to be completely removed. That's because it's one structure, but ultimately we're not objecting to a patio area behind the pool house. It's just the patio area, and the way it's been constructed, going as far as this tree and surrounding the tree, is obviously severely infecting the tree. Even the applicant's own arboriculturist has said there's only a moderate chance of it surviving. So, that's really the only point I'd make.
Thank you, Marcus. Ben, you would like to come in?
Yeah, Marcus, we've obviously had a number of enforcement cases where people are seeking to get planning permission, and we have this enforcement line, and I think the committee are always keen on seeking a solution rather than something which is really harsh potentially to people, and I guess were we to go down this enforcement route, presumably you've already kind of said it there, that there are opportunities for a different application to be put in the future for what is being instructed to be removed to be smaller in scale. I just want to sort of square that one off, really. I've never had an issue with the idea that you have the enforcement powers in order to be able to act. But equally, I share, we've almost had a collective view as a committee about not wishing to punish somebody for it. We want to solve the problem rather than, be punitive, I guess.
I think, Ben, I do understand where you're coming from, and I'm sure Marcus will come back on this now. But my understanding is that by having the authorization to take action if we need to, if they don't engage and start, and talking to us sensibly about how we get around this problem, we have the authorization to engage. And I just think it brings the applicant to the table a little easier, a little better, and gives us a better negotiation. So that's why we do it this way. But Marcus, I'm sure, will explain more eloquently.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and Councillor Gray, you are right. You know, it's not. I mean, it's not. Enforcement shouldn't be seen as a penalty. It should be seen as being necessary as and when it's necessary. I mean, in this particular case, the for whatever the reason, the patio and the pool house, albeit the pool house is not such an issue, the patio has been constructed. We need to be mindful of the fact that obviously the planning application has been in since late 2019. We all know things have been a bit delayed because of COVID, so I think you can not read too much into that particular issue. But we wouldn't want to be in a position, for example, of having to come back to you to seek in further enforcement action because the applicant refused to negotiate or said, look, this is what I want, I'm not going to move. We do need to. We're bringing this to planning committee really to give us the power to take action if we need to take action. As an authority, we don't want to waste time in getting notices drafted if we don't need to get them drafted. If the applicant were to come to us tomorrow with an amended scheme which involved removal of the area around the tree, I'm sure we'd be be very willing to discuss that with them, and it wouldn't necessarily necessitate the immediate service of a notice. So absolutely, we take a very pragmatic approach to these things, but it does help, as the Chair has mentioned, that you do have the ability to take action should you need it as quickly as possible, were you not to get a response from the applicant.
Thank you, Marcus. And as I understand it, it is a free application if it's done within 6 months of the today's date. I've got two other people, Neil Thomas and then Stuart and O3 and Vince Driscoll would like to speak. So in that order then, Neil Thomas first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Page 9, where it talks about the impact on ancient woodland, there are a couple of photographs, one from 2001 and one from 2021, aerial shots showing differences in the canopy, and there appear to be a number of trees that have been taken out in the last 20 years from this site. The canopy has clearly changed. I'm just wondering whether there's an issue there at all around needing to protect what's left of the ancient woodland in a more. I mean, I know that it is protected in a general way. All ancient woodland is, but whether there's a need to protect this specific part of our heritage by TPOing a lot more.
I'm sure our officers are looking at that, and they have TPO'd this particular one, but yeah, Marcus.
Chair, if I just come back really quickly. I mean, while it's really useful that those photographs to highlight some of the structures that have been built, and you're quite right, there does look to be some loss, particularly in the area that you'll see some ornamental trees planted. There does seem to be something that's gone there, although we do have to bear in mind over time there are different canopies can change. You know, we are talking about a 20-year period. Trees can be lost for a number of different reasons. So, trees are living things. They do sometimes fail without any intervention. I think the officers have been to this site, and while there have been works undertaken there was nothing to suggest that there was any particular problem. To be fair to the applicant in this instance, they didn't know that they needed planning permission, and they could well have just chopped that tree down and we'd have been none the wiser for it, and they didn't do that. So I don't think there is any intention to create damage there. There is some element of protection. I think at this stage we'd be nervous to go serving a blanket TPO over the whole of the woodland, because that does create in itself all sorts of issues going forward. But looking at the two photographs, there's probably only one particular canopy which looks as if it may have gone, which is the canopy just above the pool or just surrounding the pool. It's also a little difficult to tell whether it could have been low-lying shrubs or even something else. So yeah, so it's difficult to confirm from there. But I think at this stage the officer has been to the site, and they're not of a view that there is any particular imminent danger to the ancient woodland itself.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. So Stuart, then Vince, and then Eddie.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering about the tree preservation order. When was that placed on the tree then? I think Mr. Chichester suggested that when they actually did the work, there wasn't a TPO on the tree.
That is right. Yeah, it was put on when our officers realised that there was an issue there, just to give a little bit more strength because they saw there was a danger of it possibly being damaged or felled or whatever. So it was put on. But as they would have had to, as it's ancient woodland, they would have had to apply for a felling order, I understand, if it's ancient woodland. Yeah. So it really hasn't made a lot of difference other than it's formalised it.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
So Vince, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, just a quick one, Marcus. You mentioned that you haven't got a problem in the pool house. So is this refusal just for the raised terrace, or?
Thank you, Chair.
Can you?
We can't split it, I'm afraid. The only thing we can split is the enforcement action, which is why the enforcement action only authorises action on the patio. They kept the applications together as one, and so we're stuck with refusing a planning application. You can't part refuse, part allow, unfortunately. But I think you can take what you want from the report itself. It makes it very clear, and indeed the enforcement action. So we expect in due course another application around this.
Okay, just for the pool house then, is it?
And possibly retention of some of the deck, or a provision of an alternative decked area to the back, which is smaller.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vince. So I've got Eddie now. I'm going to put Stuart and Stuart's hand down. Yeah. Okay, so Eddie next, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. So our understanding then is that legal terms we've got the recommendations and the each elements of those. So the enforcement's clear that it needs to be that. I'm going to move those recommendations on the basis that as you suggested, Marcus, that we will expect a planning permission to come through with an amended plan which protects the tree and just removes the terracing around the tree area to protect it. So back to what I'm saying, move the recommendations as they stand.
Great, thank you, Eddie. Neil, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, it was kind of related to that. It was to question whether there's any benefit in deferring to give the officers a chance to negotiate a revised application, or whether we just have to decide on this.
This is what we were talking about earlier. This just prolongs and makes it messy. Whereas if we do this today, it's clean. A new application has got to come in anyway. It's free. They don't have to pay for the cost of once they've been turned down. So I would ask Planning Committee to bear that in mind and think about it. But
in that case, I'm happy to second.
There you are. We've had a nomination and a second. I will do this one by, if anybody doesn't want it to go through, any dissent to this, please speak now. I'll give you about a minute. If I don't see any hands up or hear any chirps, we will say that it was officer's recommendation unanimously. Yeah, I see a lot of nodding heads and I don't see any hands or voices. So, okay, thank you all for that one. So back on now to land east of the B4265, 2020-00351 outline, and Ian is going to present this to us. And then we have Councillor Gwyn John, I believe, wants to speak afterwards.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone see the screen okay with the plans?
Yes.
Great. So we'll be looking at two sites in this area this evening. This is the first of the two, which is it's been referred to as Site A. On the plan there, you can see the two of them together. Site A is the plan on the left, closest to the existing built form of Lantern Major, and Site B is the one further to the east. But focusing for now on Site A, this is a planning application in outline for up to 140 dwellings. The 35% of those would be affordable. All matters are reserved except for access. So that's to say that even though there's an indicative site layout here that shows the way that a site could be developed, it's only the access which would be formally determined this evening. The access is off the road that's known as Forthborough Tathan, also known as the Northern Access Road, which is the recently constructed highway from the B4265 through Eglwys Brys. Notable constraints within the site, you've got the brooks on the east boundary and the southern boundary, and as a consequence, part of the site is in a C2 flood zone, albeit the indicative layout seeks to show that the development will be located outside of those high flood risk areas. Also, there's an archaeological constraint on the sort of southwestern part of the site, which is something that was found in the last couple of years, whilst the investigatory works were taking place at the site. Again, the development would be outside of that area, and the relevant bodies, Cadw and Glamorgan Gwent Archaeological Trust, are happy with the way that site has been kind of preserved free of development. The site forms part of a residential housing allocation within the local development plan. If I go back to the original plan, just to show you that in context. So can you see the cursor moving around? The site A and the land between site A and site B is all part of one allocation, and then site B is another. But effectively, that strip of land between Eglwys Brys Road and the Northern Access Road is all a housing allocation in the local development plan. I think that's probably everything relevant for now, Chair, but obviously happy to answer any questions if they come up.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I will now invite Councillor John Gwyn. Would you like to make yourself seen and heard? Yes, I can see you.
Yeah.
I can.
Oh, yeah. There we are. Thank you, Chairman.
So you know the form,
it's
Gwyn?
not working very well. Okay, I'm back and you can hear me now.
Hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, yes, I'm fully aware of everything that Ian has told us this afternoon, but the local people are not happy. Basically, I'm opposed to this plan, and the situation is I support the comments that been made by Lantern Major Town Council in the report, also Landmace Community Council. It's a loss of open countryside yet again, and the big issue, of course, that we're concerned about in Lantern Major is the impact on the local infrastructure. Currently, I was in a meeting last night at the comprehensive school, and the head teacher told us that the school is now full. There's no spaces left in the school. Also, the surgeries, I'm amazed that the health board has not replied to this consultation, because we've got 2 surgeries in Lantern Major. One is nearly falling down. It needs a new surgery. It's over 45 years old. Our leisure centre is 42 years old, has never been really improved upon in that time. We haven't got the infrastructure to support more people coming into the town. On top of that, our traffic is chock-a-block. The roads are gridlocked basically at peak periods. And what I am concerned on this application is the flood risk yet again. Where that's going to take us on this, we've had the alleviation in Boverton for the flooding, but quite honestly, we don't know these extra houses where it's going to take us. What I am concerned about again is that who's going to live in these homes? Well, we're building more and more homes all the time, but there are so many houses available. They've stopped building houses in Cowbridge because they can't sell them. The 2 sites in Lantern Major at Heritage Gate, I was told by Persimmon that they were going to be all finished within 12 months, but they're still there 2 years later. Also, the site just around the corner from here, which is the Barrett site, that one again has not been completed. That's well overdue. And quite honestly, there's not the jobs in the area. We're seeing Aston Martin, where they're going 200 made redundant in Aston Martin. That's another concern. And quite honestly, I know they're not planning issues, but they are issues for the locality. And that is a big thing. I know this is a Welsh Government application, and Welsh Government get what they want. They are the rulers over local government wherever we go. So whatever we decide, they'll probably overrule us anyway. But the big thing about this, I am concerned about, and quite honestly, Mr. Chairman, I feel that putting more and more houses up, it's all very well, but we haven't got the jobs in the Western Vale, and the Western Vale is nothing more than a concrete jungle. Thank you.
Thank you, Gwyn, and thank you. You were very good with time. You were just under, so didn't have to stop you. Ian, do you want to respond to any of those points, or do you want to kind of wait and we'll have the debate and respond to them all in one?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to, but if there are points of those that members want specific attention to, rather than go through them one by one, I'm happy to let members raise them, and I'll address them as they come up, if you like.
Okay, you're happy. You've got Gwyn's down. I got a note to them. We'll do that then, Gwyn. Just hang on a sec. Any clarification needed from anybody? No. Nick, you've got your hand up, Nick.
I have, Chairman. Thank you for that. I've listened to what Gwyn's had to say, but I had my own point, really. Now, I appreciate that this and also Site B, which I won't talk about because we'll get round to that, are both outline planning applications. But what always concerns me is the up to number of homes that is quoted. We got done on this rather badly on the Barry waterfront, where the up to number continued to rise and rise and rise. So I'm just wondering what sort of weight that this number actually carries in a future full application.
Well, as I would understand that, Nick, if it says up to, anything below or that number, I would say would fit. Anything above that, but it all has to come back anyway for full design. So it all comes back, the final number of houses all comes back to committee anyway.
Yeah, but it's strengthened by the fact it's got outline planning permission. That's my point. That's my point, Chairman. And the fact is, we got screwed over on the waterfront. I don't want to see it here.
No, it would have outline planning permission for the number set in there or up to that, so they could build less, but they couldn't build more.
We'll see.
Are we right on that, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, I would say if they gained outline consent for up to 140, any reserved matters application they submitted would, as you say, Chair, would have to be for no more than that. There would be nothing to stop them making a separate full application for more units if they wanted to. We'd have to assess that on its merits and decide, does that provide for sufficient, things like open space and drainage infrastructure? Personally, I think it's unlikely they get more than that on here because there are constraints on the site that probably weren't immediately apparent when it was allocated, such as the archaeology, and there's obviously the flooding constraints. With Barry Waterfront, I mean, it was allocated for, I think, originally 2,000. Actually, we're seeing less delivered on the waterfront than the full allocation. And again, I suspect
actually it was 100 originally.
Right, in the LD, it has less been delivered than is allocated for in the LDP. So what I'm saying is there's not been more delivered than the LDP allocation or the outline application. On this is part of a wider allocation that's 375 in total. Again, I would be surprised if that were exceeded. If it were their prerogative to submit an application for a larger number, like I referred to, it would need new transport work to look at traffic impacts. And as I said, it would only be acceptable if all of the infrastructure within the site that was necessary could be fitted in. But for tonight, as you say, Chair, we're looking at the app for 140.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. Yeah, just to reiterate, we did jump straight in, but I did ask if there was any clarification. I didn't hear any. So Ben is next up on my list. Ben Gray.
Yeah, unless Marcus wanted to add on to Ian's point before I change tack slightly.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair. It was really quickly just to point out, because it's a very solid point which Councillor Hodges has raised. But actually, if we look at the vast majority of planning applications we've dealt with over the since the LDP's been adopted, and actually before the LDP was adopted too, the numbers have not equated that have been built on sites have not equated to the numbers that were allocated in the LDP. So in this particular case, I think the 140 figure stems from the figure which Ian referred to, which was for both sites. But in most cases now, because of the various constraints that are applicable to sites, we're not seeing even with sites meeting density requirements in terms of where they can be built, quite high density requirements, we're not seeing numbers which exceed the maximum figures. So the 140 is extremely unlikely, I have to say, in this particular case, just because of the site constraints and the site constraints that are on this site, which we're aware of to do with issues which Ian has already raised. So just to give some comfort to members, as a matter of fact, right the way through since the LDP has been adopted, we have seen, because of certain requirements that are applicable to each site, be it drainage or be it archaeology or be it other issues, we have seen figures below what is often applied for an outline coming through in the final determination phase.
Lovely, thank you, Marcus. Ben, did you have any other points?
Yes, sorry, I was just allowing that to continue there. I wanted to say I recognise what Councillor John's discussing, and I also recognise that at one point he said that actually they weren't planning considerations that he was raising, and I think we need to talk about it in terms of that. This is an outline permission for a site off of a new road, and too often we hear the line, there's no infrastructure ahead of development. If anything, we've certainly heard of other parts of the Western Vale where the people aren't using that road and causing issues elsewhere. This is potentially going to be a well-serviced road. The points that are raised in terms of objection, I've looked at the report, I'd read it before today, and clearly that in order for us to sort of go with those, they need to be backed up by the statutory bodies and the Highways Department, Welsh Water, Natural Resources Wales. None of them, unfortunately, make those objections. And so, bearing in mind all the reserve matters that will come back to us, I'd move officer recommendations.
Thank you, Ben. I have now, after Ben, Ian Johnson. I'm going to lower your hand, Nick, and put it back up if you want to come in. So, Ian.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of quite quick points. I just wanted to clarify with Llanfaes Community Council, one of their points is the development is outside the existing LDP. I was just wondering if Ian Robinson could clarify that, because I was assuming it was item 7, I think, in the LDP, which is, you referred to earlier, a wider 340 unit allocation.
Sure he will. I'm going to bring Ian in now at the end. I'm going to bring Ian in at the end to sum it all up and whatever.
Yeah. Okay. The reason I'm just clarifying that is because obviously there was a long process that led to the local development plan being brought into place, and we did have a vote on that as local councillors to accept the local development plan. So it seems a little bit curious to me for people to come back and complain about what appeared to be allocated sites and saying that there's not the infrastructure in place, that there's all sorts of issues with this, because we had a very long years of debate on this. So people come back and vote for something that was obviously an issue for other places as well, and then to say, oh, but we've got all sorts of infrastructure problems here, seems a little bit out of step with the nature of discussion we've had on the LDP over the years. Either there's problems everywhere or there's not problems. People voted for it. I didn't, because I saw there were infrastructure issues across the Vale, and I don't think that itself is helpful to be ployvol is the Welsh. I'll think of the translation later on. I just wanted to have more clarification on the issues regarding the flood zone C2 and C2 flood zone. What does that really mean in terms of how this works? Thanks.
Thank you, Ian. Again, I'll ask Ian to come in after Ed, if you don't mind, so he can kind of sum all the points up in one rather than back and forth. So, Eddie, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. To some extent, I did want to hear what Ian had to say about some of the points, but I'll take your point. There's quite a lot coming in. Ian, Councillor Johnson, I'd just like to say that I can assure you you're fully aware of the LDP process. Sometimes local residents' voice doesn't get to the level where they can actually impact on the LDP overall. So I think that's unfair to actually make that statement, because there certainly was considerable amount of objection to particularly this area of development. and as you well know, the Northern Access Road in itself was another objection. So as we all agree, not everybody has that view, but let's not say that everybody didn't object to it, because that's certainly not the case. It's unfortunate, isn't it? We come to an application like this and we can't include the infrastructure elements, and we can't include those facility elements. It has to be, there must be some way that in future we can address it. I accept it, and being on, a planning member, I recognise that we can only talk about the planning terms. So, and as it's an outline, then we're not really able to challenge the detail. So, I've got, with the planning matters that have been put forward, there isn't any real objection that we can put, because we don't know the detail, for example, flood risks, the infrastructure, and I concur with Councillor Hodges that we've seen applications saying up to, and in fact the heritage development in Lantwit was one of those where we thought we were going to get 120 and ended up with 175, and as Councillor John pointed out, they've not all been completed or finished off and filled. So there are concerns that, we do have an LDP and it has a plan, but let's just say it's still a work in progress. So we understand residents' point of views. I, as a planning member, and I've got to point out that I am on the town council. So, but I need to state that I was not involved in any of the decisions. I didn't vote on any of those, so therefore I can vote on this particular item. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much. I'll wait to hear what Ian's going to say.
Okay, so Ian, Marcus wants to come in as well. Shall I let Marcus come in and let Ian have the kind of everything to deal with? Sorry, Ian, you have a lot to deal with. And before Marcus comes in, I will second Ben's, because I don't believe we've had a seconder. So Marcus.
I was only going to help Ian with the, if I may display the LDP plan so that members can see. I'm hoping that's showing the LDP plan for you now.
It is.
Just so members can see. And I just wanted to point out that because the LDP was drafted actually before the Northern Access Road was completed, and I don't know if members can make this out, the actual, where I have the hand moving now is the line, the actual line of the Northern Access, the access road to the St Athan site, and actually the blue line is the line that was shown in the LDP. So they slightly cross. Because of that, the allocation does show is slightly inside the actual road that was constructed. You can see a slight gap there, but I would point out that the actual planning application doesn't show housing in those areas and shows it within, largely within the site, or completely within the site, shown red here, which is the LDP site. Albeit the LDP site actually does go over the roundabout, but that is because it was drafted at a time when the actual road hadn't been constructed. So just for clarity, the proposed housing is within the site shown on the LDP. That was just to help Ian out really on that particular point. So
thank you, Marcus. Right, Ian.
Okay.
Your list.
Just moving on from that. There is. We'll come to this on site B. There is part of site B sits more clearly outside of the allocation, and we can look at that and come to that in due course. But as Marcus says, this one is for all intents and purposes fully within the allocation. In terms of the flood zone, so Natural Resources Wales will object if housing is proposed in a C2 flood zone. They'll also object if the main access into the site was in a flood zone. That would also have likely received an objection from them. Members may recall through the course of the LDP that the traveller site that was being considered at the time off Hayes Road, the site itself didn't flood, but the access into it did, and that alone was enough. But here, because the kind of critical infrastructure and the houses would be located outside, there wouldn't be an objection. What I would suggest is, whilst Natural Resources Wales are normally consulted at outline stage only when we're looking at kind of points of principle, it would be a very good idea in this case, if outline permission is granted, for them to also be consulted again at reserve matters stage, so that they can be satisfied that the detailed layout and any infrastructure serving that isn't reliant on land within the flood zone. So, for example, things like play areas, the access, any dwellings and gardens, they wouldn't be allowed to be in there. But we can consult them again at reserve matters stage just to make sure that they were happy with that layout. In terms of infrastructure, I mean, it's a point that comes up all the time, as it should. There are some forms of infrastructure in settlements which I would suggest benefit from new houses. So shops and services, are likely to be better sustained by an increase in trade from more people living in the area. There are others which obviously are of concern, and the one that's often raised is health services. At the moment, that is really for the health board to look at. It's an issue in planning which is discussed all the time about what role the planning system can play in delivering those health infrastructure, and that's a conversation that remains ongoing. But for now, it's not something that we've ever been able to get financial contributions for in the way that we do for education and open space and transport and things like that. In the case of education, members might note at the end of the report, the section 106 contribution here is worded in a way which is slightly different to how it's often done, which is a more flexible kind of wording, such that the money could be spent on either community facilities or education, or what's the third one? Education, community facilities, and
no.
Sorry?
Is it sustainable transport?
No, it's not transport.
While Ian is talking about that, Chair, one other point which he's raised, which is really valid, is regarding, and this actually Councillor John raised too, which is valid, and it'll be the same for the next application, is in relation to health. And I think it's important that members know that when the LDP is drafted and goes through its consultation and allocates sites and allocates numbers to sites, the health board is consulted and involved in that process right the way through. So the health board is expected to plan its allocations based on an LDP. And if it has really serious concerns about a particular housing allocation in an LDP, it should raise those concerns as part of the LDP process. It is a joined up, the LDP process is much more joined up than the old UDP process. That didn't involve particular consultation with health boards and left health boards scrabbling around trying to find accommodation for sites. But actually the LDP process does involve that consultation. And I know full well that the health board were involved in those discussions, and they should be making their plans based around the allocations that are in the LDP. So just to clarify that point.
Thanks. Sorry, I've got this now. Yeah, it was education, community facilities, and public open space. So that will allow members in the normal consultation processes to kind of respond to need as it arises. So that it might be that there's a particular need for community facilities. It might be that the more critical need is with education. So that will allow the council to kind of to deal with those needs in that flexible way. In terms of, I'll just go through the other points that Councillor John raised as well, because I think it wasn't it. In terms of traffic, so there's been transport work done in the normal way. Because of where the site is, and it's sort of located with sort of fairly strategic roads with the Northern Access Road and the B4265, you wouldn't expect there to be a significant amount of traffic impacts kind of within the settlements, if you like, or the existing part of the settlements that we know. Members may recall the housing application at Cowbridge Road, the one that's was approved a couple of years ago. Now that attracted a contribution for improvements at the Giles Crossroads, but that's because of the location of that site. The flows of traffic were more heavily split towards the Giles Crossroads. Given where this site is, traffic modelling suggests that actually traffic is, well, not none, but a large proportion of traffic is unlikely to go backwards towards St Athan than towards Gileston, and it's more likely to use the NAR and then go on to the B4265. The traffic modelling says that there's not going to be any impacts from this development that would make junctions go over capacity. all of the development is allocated in the LDP in this area, the employment and the housing. Take that all together, and there's likely to be some work needed at junctions, but that point isn't arrived at by this site or by this site cumulatively with other things that have been approved so far, such as the Keithrow employment site, which committee saw a few months ago. What else have I got? In terms of need for houses, I mean, as members know, this is always something which is generally market-led, and house builders will only build where they see there being a demand there. And it goes back to the original point that it's allocated, and granting planning permission where developments are acceptable, but granting planning permission on allocated sites is important in the council being able to show that it's delivering its strategy, its local development plan strategy. So that's, that a lot of the work in assessing need is done in arriving at the point of allocating the sites in the first place. And that's not to say that things can't and never do change within the 15 years of a plan period, but there's no evidence to hand that we have that suggests that there's anything fundamentally flawed about the strategy for the number of houses that have been allocated. I think that covers everything, but please someone tell me if they still have a query that hasn't been covered.
I don't see any others. Councillor Gray nominated, put the officer's recommendation up. I seconded. There's nobody else indicating, so I'll try. No, I think
Councillor Edwards has put their hand up.
Yes. Stuart?
Thank you, Chair. Going back to the LDP, if I recall rightly, when we did vote it through, we were almost forced into voting it through based on what Welsh Government might do to the Vale if we didn't. And I think there was some fine involved or something that they might have done to the Vale. And we were told that it would open up development for a lot of smaller developers as well. It didn't necessarily mean we agreed with everything that was on it. And I'm going to support Councillor John tonight. He's the ward councillor. He knows a lot more about Llantwit than I ever do. And I'll be supporting, I'll be voting against the application based on all his concerns. I won't go through them again. We've heard them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Stuart. Okay. Right then. So I'll do a roll call. If you can say whether you are for or against the officer's recommendation on this application. So start with myself, and I'm going to be voting for officer's recommendation. Councillor Ben Gray, please.
For officer recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Birch.
For officer recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Cave.
For officer recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Drake.
Oh, for officer recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Driscoll.
Against officer recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Stuart Edwards. I think we know which way you're voting.
You're quite correct, Chair. Against.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hodges.
Abstain.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp.
Against officer recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Morgan.
For recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Rowlands.
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas. Neil.
Yeah, for.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson. You're muted, Margaret.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Against the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Against recommendations.
Thank you. Okay, Margarita Wright's not here, so just quickly, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, 8. I make it 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 against, and 2 abstentions. So that is clearly carried, and we will move on to the next application, which is Site B. We do have a speaker, Mr. Harris, on this, but Ian will introduce it. I will then ask Mr. Harris to come in and with his talk, and after Mr. Harris, I'll ask Councillor Gwyn John to come back, and he's going to talk to us as well. So over to you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I've shown the plan on the screen for context, so members can just refresh their minds of where this site lies relative to site A. Most of this site is within the LDP allocation. There's a portion of the site around the western end which is not within the allocation, so there's a distinction to be made there. The allocation in this case was for 90 houses. This application is in outline again and proposes up to 100 houses. Again, 35% at least would be affordable housing. Similar to site A, the site would be accessed from the Northern Access Road from the north, and there would be potentially a kind of a secondary pedestrian link on the western boundary to the existing lane. Similar constraints again to site A in terms of the relationship to the brook and flood zones. If I can get a plan up here, so again that shows that the southern and eastern portion of the site lies within a flood zone, but in the same way as the indicative layout showed on site A, the plan seeks to show how the site could be developed without relying on the flood zone land. Natural Resources of Wales have sent an almost identical response, which is no objection, essentially because those areas are outside of the flood zone. Yeah, as I said just then, the issues are really fairly similar. The main difference being the inclusion of the land outside the allocation. In officer's opinion, this is a kind of classic example of rounding off, if you like. There's a physical defensible boundary to the north of the site, which is the Forth Road Tathen. You've got the lane and the allocation within the settlement immediately to the left, and then again immediately to the east. So the inclusion of that land doesn't, in officers' opinions, present any fundamental planning problems in terms of its relationship to settlement form. You know, when we think about development in the countryside, we think about changing the character of rural land, but this land is sort of essentially kind of landlocked by parts of the settlement on either side. So we feel it's acceptable in principle. There are representations received relating to the loss of existing agricultural buildings on this land, which it's very possible that the speaker may refer to in more detail in a moment, and I can come back on and clarify points on that if need be. But essentially, there's land which is leased from Welsh Government, which has been used for agricultural purposes, which would no longer be the case if the development goes ahead. Albeit the applicant has indicated that they don't intend to keep renewing the lease on that, and that's why they've included it within their site. I think that's all the main material considerations for now.
Ian, do you want to?
Yes,
shall I just display this plan, which is the plan showing the? I'm hoping that's come up now. Can members see the plan showing the actual allocation in purple, and then the edge red site plan? So just to show that there is, while there is a little bit of an extension on the one end, actually at the other end, it doesn't. It goes just slightly beyond at one end, and it goes beyond at the other end. So just so members can see what the allocation. The purple is the actual allocation, and the edge red is the application site. So just for clarity, okay.
Thank you, Marcus. Okay, all right. I think we need to see and hear Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris, could you turn your camera and, well, you don't have to turn your camera on, but we'd love to see you if you can.
Hopefully you could see me now and hear me.
I can see and hear you beautifully, thank you. Okay. Same rules with you. You will have 3 minutes from the time you start, if you have not finished, I will be shouting at you. So over to you, Mr. Harris.
Okay, good afternoon, Chairman and ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to draw the committee's attention to two aspects of this planning application that I believe are unacceptable and warrant its refusal. My first point relates to the land proposed for development, which is outside the LDP allocated land. This land forms a wedge between the LDP allocation and the settlement identified as Froglands, that includes 29 permanent chalet homes and 7 detached properties. This is a community which is part of the Landmice village. The previous outline planning approval for the military and the LDP respected this wedge for good reasons, in particular to maintain a clear demarcation between the new development and the existing community. Apart from the obvious negative impact, and the use of this land would result in the demolition of 4 permanently good agricultural barns, which form some 21% of the area. These barns are in present use for agriculture and community purposes and have plenty of life left in them. In my opinion, the proposed development of this area goes against a number of the Vale de Morgan's policies. I would remind the committee that only recently planning permission for a single building located only 150 metres from the edge of this area was refused on the grounds of unjustified and unacceptable form of residential development in a rural location, which by reason of the rural character of the site and its surroundings will adversely affect the character and setting of the countryside. My second point relates to the main site, the LDP allocation. And I believe that the fact that this site is located right opposite and within 200 metres approximately of a live MOD firing range was overlooked at the LDP public inquiry. This range can be used 7 days a week, including Sundays, and into the night hours of up to 11 p.m. I can tell you that it is regularly used. No matter how much mitigation is used in the building fabric, you cannot reduce the exceptional noise of live gunfire when you have your windows open and you are in your garden. This fact alone makes this site totally inappropriate for residential development and negates the principle of the amenity of the future occupiers of the site mentioned in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act. This firing range is not shown on any drawings, and neither is the impact of the firing range mentioned in the report before you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. And again, you were very well behaved, well within your 3 minutes. Okay, so any points of clarification from any of the members? I don't see any hands coming up. I don't hear anybody shouting. That leaves me to thank Mr. Harris. If you would like to just pop your camera off and mute your microphone, thank you very much. And it leaves me to ask Councillor John to come back in. And here he comes. There you go. You're back again, Gwyn.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I'm not going to repeat what I've already said, which affects this site as much as the other site with infrastructure and everything. But I will say that I support David Harris wholeheartedly. He's absolutely 100% in his report tonight. I cannot believe that how 2 nearby residents, or nearby, I should say, landowners, have been turned down with their building. One person in a house of the old pub area, he was turned down because he's outside the settlement boundary. That's the other side of the hedge from this development. Also, another person was refused an extension to a house outside the settlement boundary just up the road from this development. But then, of course, Mr. Harris did mention to you as well about the firing range. Now, the firing range, it's a different animal to what it was when I worked at RAF St Athan, because it was RAF days. And the RAF use of the firing range was far, far less than what it is these days, because you have the army there. And the army are using it constantly. And Mr. Harris is 100% correct. The noise from this firing range is excessive. And I can assure you that I would never buy a house in near the area. But what I can't understand about this is that if there's going to be maybe not 140 houses built on the other side or planned for the other side eventually, why do they start on this side? Why not finish the one side? You know, I cannot see that they've gone outside of their boundaries here and they're making it particularly difficult. But there again, the Welsh Government are very happy to destroy farm land and what have you. They did enough of this when we had the the school possibly come to St Athan when they did this with the late Mr. On Batsley's farm.
Yes.
Mr. Lucker of the farm, he's passed away sadly, but his farm was taken off him, which I think was appalling. But this is another situation where they're taking Mr. Harris's away. Admitted it's Welsh Government land, but at the same time, they bought all the land right across the Western Vale virtually to accommodate this academy that never came here. I got one question to ask officers. Would the fact that I don't think it would affect at this time an outline, but the Northern Access Road has not been adopted by the council as yet. So that's got to be considered. This is good farmland again, destroyed. And to be honest with you, I'm totally against even touching this site at all. And I fully support Landmaze Community Council, Mr. Harris, and all the residents have objected to this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Gwyn. If you just hang on a second while we clarify any points that people want clarified. No hands up. Thank you very much, Gwyn. We'll see you again shortly. Ian, do you want to respond to both of those, and then we'll open the debate up after you've done that?
Will do, Chair. Thank you. Just in terms of the Northern Access Road being adopted, that's not material as far as we're concerned to the acceptability in planning terms of this allocated site. There was brief reference to farmland. It's not the higher grade farmland, so it doesn't fall foul of policies that seek to protect the best and most versatile farmland. In terms of the reference to other developments that have been refused, so the ones being referred to, the one there's one adjacent to a property called Oakwood, which is it's not a million miles away from here, but it is fundamentally different in terms of its relationship to the settlement. This additional land we're talking about here is very much a rounding off and logical continuation of the settlement. It sits to the south of the Northern Access Road, which is a clear, demarcating boundary to the settlement and this land. The other case is the one at Oakwood was north of the road, not couldn't be viewed as rounding off of the settlement and was just arbitrarily a house in the countryside. Yes, it's close, but there's always going to be a line where you say that's rounding off and that's not. And the one at Oakwood, there was an appeal against the refusal of it, and that appeal was unsuccessful. Similarly, the other one that Councillor John refers to, again, it's a different relationship to the settlement. Each case has got to be treated on its merits, and just because they happen to be within a few hundred yards of each other doesn't mean that recommending one for approval is contradicting the rationale of the others. It's a different set of assessments. In terms of the agricultural land, I think it was estimated as being 20% of the land here. It's a much smaller proportion of the unit as a whole, if you like. The bulk of the land referred to in the representations made by Mr. Harris to the application is remote from this site. So this land is a much smaller percentage of that as a whole. It's not considered to be fundamentally an established farming business, if you like, where planning policy or planning control could give it significant weight in the overall balance. A number of years ago, one of the earlier iterations of applications at Darren Farm in Cowbridge was refused, and one of the reasons there was the impact on a tenant farm, and it was a loss of a very large proportion of a very large agricultural business. And we considered the same issue again, the application at COG in Sully, albeit that wasn't held to be a significant impact, but it was a loss of a much bigger proportion of a much bigger farm. Here, whilst I have to say I do fully understand and appreciate and sympathise with Mr. Harris's position in that it's land that he's been able to lease and has carried activities on, and understandably doesn't want to lose it. Fundamentally, it just isn't something which we could justify refusing the planning application for, because it's not a significant kind of agricultural impact, and it's land which is not secure for those purposes. So, Welsh Government could have terminated a lease on this before a planning application was made, and it wouldn't even be an issue. So whilst I do sympathise with that position personally, I just don't see it as something which we could justifiably refuse the planning application for. In terms of noise, yeah, there is the firing range close by, but again, it's an allocated site. Our shared regulatory services officers have been consulted, and they acknowledged the relationship between them, and they suggested that a condition requiring mitigation as far as possible should be required. Councillor John notes he wouldn't want to live there. Some people would, and to a large degree, it's going to, people will be entitled to make that choice when they look at buying a house there, if houses are built there. It's allocated, and these things were taken into account when the site was allocated. That really is a matter of principle, and I don't think we can revisit the principle of the development of the site, which is allocated.
Thank you, Ian. I think Marcus just wants to come in with a point here.
Yeah, really, Ian said it all, but I just wanted to point out that with the firing range, clearly Welsh Government must have taken that into account. If the noise were to become so great and complaints were to be received, there is a procedure where complaints can be made, which is governed by our shared regulatory services team. And notwithstanding the fact that it's military, the rules have changed significantly around that, and where in the past that would have been a ace card where they could have played that and carried on doing what they wanted to do. That isn't the case anymore, as I understand it, under the environmental protection regulations. So were it ever to become a problem in the future, it may well be that there would be times imposed where the shooting couldn't take place, and that would be done via noise abatement notices and that type of thing, which our colleagues in shared regulatory services would have to serve. But again, they have been consulted on this and they haven't made any objection.
Lovely. Thank you, Marcus. Okay, I've got Councillor Ben Gray and Councillor Hodges. So, Councillor Gray, you were first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to, you may have covered it in your comments just then, Ian. There was reference made to part of the site not forming part of the LDP. I know you talked about natural boundaries. Is this because of where the road has gone and what have you? And I know obviously Marcus had shown the graphic before about the area that was allocated and then it was a reduced area. Is this a slightly moved area? I'm assuming that's the case. But and then in terms of page 62, it talks about the Ministry of Defence's responses requesting further consultation. Presumably that is, don't forget us at reserve matters. We don't have an objection to outline. It's just obviously as it's written, it's a bit vaguer. And then yeah, if you just answered those 2 points, and Chair, if I could come back in after that.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, you're right, Councillor Gray. That's the case. They want to be consulted at reserve matters stage. In terms of the first point, I think the allocation followed the housing sites that were part of the Defence Technical College applications previously. That doesn't infer that the other land is fundamentally unacceptable. And I speaking as a planning officer assessing the application, I can't identify any planning reason why that land isn't acceptable as to form part of part of a residential development. I think, as I say, I think it's just followed the allocation followed the lines of previous housing allocations of the site, which were proposed by the applicants of the Defence Technical College, rather than it being something that the council imposed on them at an earlier stage.
So yeah, sorry, what Marcus has got on the screen now obviously doesn't show a shading over the farm. Is that what the speaker was referring to then?
Yeah, I mean, there's two areas. There's the area on the eastern side, which I think is probably less controversial. That wouldn't have houses built in it, but it may, for example, have drainage infrastructure in it. Then there's the land sort of between the two allocations, which is just adjacent to Froglands Farm, which is the land which the speaker was referring to. But as I say, it's not our position, our view that there's any fundamental reason why that shouldn't or can't be included in a planning application. It's got, it benefits from the same logical defensible boundary as the allocations do, that being the road to the north.
Just to add. Sorry, if I could just add to what Ian said there. Going back, he is completely right. The allocations follow the lines that were drawn as part of the Defence Training College proposals dating back to 2010. And what's happened is obviously there are little elements here. This is unusual because the site has fitted into has been drawn on a plan, or the allocation was drawn on a plan where the Northern Access Road didn't actually exist. So what's happened is that the lines have slightly changed. At the time of the Defence Training College, the Froglands Farm issue and the land that was being leased off Welsh Government was dealt with at that time, and they decided not to include that within the allocation that was proposed. That has changed for whatever reason. We don't know exactly, but in all reality, it's within the confines of the road. And now there would be no reason, as Ian has said, to not include it within the housing site, albeit the bit that the nib that's shown travelling up here by the river, you can see here, they don't propose any housing on there, and as Ian has said, they just propose drainage infrastructure. That area is actually within some of the C2 flood areas, so that is why they probably are not going to build upon.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair, just say could have come back. Thank you for the explanation. This is definitely different to Site A, and so it's useful to have looked at these in a different context. But I think a lot of the same things I said before do apply. I've looked through the statutory consultees. I can't see a planning reason to refuse the outline permission. I realise a lot will happen at reserved matters, and I would move officer recommendations.
Thank you, Ben. I've got Nick Hodges and Eddie Williams wanting to speak. Nick, you're first on the list. Over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Same point I'd like to make on Site B as I did on Site A, which is the up to number, but I'll pass over that more quickly because I want to talk about something that's been raised by a few people now, and that was the abortive academy that was in front of us a number of years ago. That actually, apart from all the infrastructure works, buildings and everything that would have entailed, actually had as part of it a huge number of houses as part of the scheme. I seem to remember that every member on the planning committee bar me was all in favour of it then, no matter how many houses it brought. I actually put forward at the time, not only my opposition, but the fact that if the academy wasn't granted, then the houses should not come. And that was agreed to. Now, down the line now, we just have the houses. So there's a bit of selective forgetfulness going on with some councillors here tonight. And I do look forward to the political way in which the Tories will be voting tonight to try and slap the independents in Llantwit. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. As ever. Eddie, would you like to come in there?
You can't see them all now. You can't see the ones
Yeah,
on top of it.
I suppose the key issue for me is recognising that we've got.
Hang on, Ed. Gordon, could you turn your mic off, please? Sorry, Ed, you carry on now. I could hear Gordon muttering away there.
The key issue, we've covered all the other points, flooding, infrastructure and the LDP, so they're in the other site, and those same views apply to this one. It's the additional point where we've got an individual leasing part of the land, and unfortunately he's going to be eked off. It's an all or nothing plan, which is frustrating. It's a pity that the plan can't be adapted to accommodate that individual, for at least for the period while the lease is ongoing. I know leases, it's not a 99-year lease or whatever, and it gets renewed at the moment, but it's a pity. And not for that alone. Somebody I've heard what Ian said about the grade of the land, but nevertheless, it's still agricultural, and it's just easy. Another element where an individual, we are supposed to be staying sustainable, and here we are taking an element of sustainability away. So that's one of the points I'd like to add. And as in the previous application, I'm not going to agree to the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Ed. I've got Councillor Ian Johnson wanting to come in now. I think we'll do the same. I'll let everybody have a go, and then Ian sum up and answer all the points at once. So, Ian, would you like to come in?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just quite briefly, and obviously the number of houses, or the up to number here, is greater than was at the allocation at the LDP as a result of the rounding off. I'm unhappy. I feel that at increasing the numbers on there, I would like a little more just clarification on the C2 flood zone from Ian as well, and the sort of the impact of that on the southern side of the site, because it feels like it's been sort of slightly squeezed to get more houses on, whilst trying to keep them out of the C2 flood zone. Also, a little bit of clarification just regarding the impact of noise, etc., from the camp. I think there was a suggestion that the speaker said that it seemed not to have been mentioned in the public inquiry regarding the LDP. I think I heard an officer suggesting earlier that it must have been considered. I'd just like a little bit more reassurance that it has. I appreciate the arguments that like with the licensing matters, etc. This can be resolved afterwards. Well, I'm not so sure that argument holds as much water here. So I'd like a little bit more reassurance that it has been considered. There is evidence it's been considered, and it's not just been accidentally forgotten about all the way through the process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And I've got one more wanting to speak before Ian answers all our points. Margaret Wilkinson.
Thank you. I would be concerned if this was a full application. I'm concerned about the firing range. As we have heard, the RAF didn't use it as much. It is now an army camp and they do use firing ranges much more. But not only that, yes, you buy a house there and you can put complaints in. In the meantime, you still got to put up for that noise. Now that's easy to say, but when you're there, if I'm wavering at the moment, I know it's an own outline application, but I am wavering because I'm concerned about certain items that I don't think's been answered.
Thank you, Margaret. I will hand over to Ian now because I don't see anybody else asking questions, but I will remind members that we have to think upon this with planning reason. And if we are looking to refuse it, bear in mind we will need valid planning reason to refuse it. So Ian, over to you to respond to the questions so far, please.
You're on mute, Ian.
Thank you, Marcus. Sorry. Thank you. In terms of the numbers, as Councillor Johnson mentions, it is 100 versus 90, but the site is larger. I'd probably have more concern if the site was the same size as the allocated site and a developer was obviously trying to squeeze more in than the allocation, then that would be something. But where the site is bigger, I personally don't see that as an issue, because I think that's the clear reason why the site could potentially accommodate more than the allocation. In terms of the C2 flood zone, it will constrain developable areas. If when a reserve matters application comes in, the developer can't demonstrate that they can fit in 100 houses and the necessary play space to serve 100 houses and the drainage infrastructure and the parking, then they won't get planning permission for 100 houses. So that constraint is what it is, but it granting outline for up to 100 doesn't mean that reserve matters consent has to be granted for 100. It's still very much the onus on the developer to show that many units can be done in a way which meets all the standards that it needs to. In terms of the noise, I mean, I didn't refer to the LDP inquiry. What I said was it was a fairly general statement that this site was allocated in knowledge of the relationship between it and the MOD site. I'm afraid I'm not going to be able this evening and within this debate to point to a specific line in the inspector's report or a specific line in the background evidence to the LDP to say where exactly that was that point was discussed. But all I can say is that I'm absolutely confident that site was allocated in full consideration of the relationship with the MOD site. It's not it's a well-known an established relationship. I hear what members are saying, and I understand that it's a site which is potentially going to be subject to a different kind of noise impacts to what a number of residential sites are. But I would just reiterate that that is very much a point of principle in the allocation of that site. It is not something which has changed post allocation, and I think the council would have significant problems defending a decision to refuse the principle of development on an allocated site. I don't see how we could defend that.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, do we have anybody else wanting to come in? I am happy. I don't believe there's a seconder. I am happy to second. Marcus, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, it was just really with regard to that issue around the firing range as well. It's an important point to note that, as Ian has said, the Special Forces Defence Group, Support Group, sorry, which are the military unit which are based there, have been there for many years. They were there actually when the Defence Training College was being considered. So the fact that there would be a firing range there is going to be relevant. I think I understand members' concerns that the comments I made around SRS and the ability there is to take action with it to become the noise to become a nuisance. But I think it's really important to note that that site was allocated in the knowledge that there is a military camp across the road from it. And I think our colleagues in Shared Regulatory Service have been consulted on this planning application and have not raised objections around that point. And I think that is a really, really important point, because if we were to try and refuse it on a specific issue around noise pollution caused by a firing range, or even just generally from a military camp, that would carry no weight at all without any specific objections from our colleagues in Shared Regulatory Service, who should be raising those concerns, and if that is the case, and haven't done so. So on that basis, I think it would be very, very difficult if the committee were to raise that as a concern in terms of any refusal. So I just wanted to say how concerned I would be about taking that forward. In my view, I would add that I think that would be a case of the council opening itself up to possible costs application. And please be aware that that would be quite considerable, because you would expect the developer, the Welsh Government, for example, to proceed with quite considerable noise assessments and tests to be undertaken to dispute it, which we would be liable for as part of any appeal. So I just wanted to flag that point up.
Okay, thanks, Marcus. Right, so it's been moved and seconded that we go for officers' recommendations. I'll do a roll call again, and I'll start with myself. I'm voting for. Councillor Gray?
For officer recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Birch?
For officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Cave?
Against officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Drake?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Driscoll?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Edwards?
Against officer recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Hodges?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Kemp?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Michael Morgan?
Abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Leighton Rowlands?
Against.
Thank you. Councillor Neil Thomas?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Eddie Williams?
Against.
Thanks, Ed. Councillor Wilson?
Abstain, because I had connection issues, so I didn't hear all the debate.
Okay. Rightio then. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 4 abstentions. Chairman's casting vote. Just there. Okay. Thank you. That takes us on to.
So just to clarify, Chair, you cast vote in favour.
Yes, I did. Yes. Yeah. So that takes us to Fontagary Holiday and Leisure Park, 2020-01271 full. And Ian is presenting this to us again.
Thank you, Chair. Can members see the plan now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So this is a planning application for a new 3 metre wide combined footway and cycleway, which would run from by the train station car park across to Fontegary Leisure Park. At the moment, it's countryside and it's not a public right of way. By all accounts, there is informal use of the route across those fields. So this application would formalise that route. The application was initially submitted for a route which is 4 metres wide, and there were a number of public representations received which raised concerns that at that width it could be used by vehicles. It's subsequently been reduced to 3 metres in width, and there's a condition requiring details of bollards either end, which would prevent sort of vehicular use. There is a condition, members will note as well, which requires this to be adopted as a proper public right of way. So it's not just a private route; it would be protected as a public route, and it would link up with the existing public right of way that runs kind of north to south by the leisure park, and then it connects with the coastal path. The part of the site is a sink, but that's a site of interest for nature conservation. That's mainly for kind of its grassland value, albeit because the site has been used informally along the route of the path, that's been kind of, the grass has been largely worn away, and the ecologist has no objection to the proposals. Should add, the application also includes the change of use of part of the land adjacent to the leisure park as a kind of an overflow car park that would be used on bank holidays and peak seasons. It would be finished in a kind of a grasscrete kind of like a sort of hard plastic kind of mesh matting, if you like. So there wouldn't be a significant kind of visual intrusion into the field that you would kind of get with a more traditional tarmac or concrete hard standing. So the application is recommended for approval, and I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Ian. Okay, I've got Gordon Kemp's hand up, and as the local member, I would invite him to come in and speak.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to just perhaps clarify to start off with. It's mentioned that this is a temporary application. When we say temporary, are we talking that it's not for a 12-month use, or is it, or what is exactly meant by temporary in this context?
Ian, would you like to?
Yeah, I think the temporary relates to the car parking, in that it's not proposed that would be a functioning car park, 12 months a year. That's only bank holidays and peak season, whereas the footpath would not be temporary, to my understanding.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. I suppose if we knocked a day off at the end and took out the 1st of October, we could put the proposal to music, couldn't we? May to September. But,
very good.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not happy with this application. This is open countryside, as has been said, and I'm concerned that there's sort of intrusion into that already. Now, I know it's made clear in the report that we can only look at the application that's before us, but I am very concerned that if this is accepted and this goes ahead, there will be further applications for other development in this particular area. I was noting particularly a comment in the report where it mentions, there are so many bits here, but I think this is talking about ecology and the environment, and that yes, the ecological impacts. It mentions the need for the development clearly outweighs, or reason for it, the development clearly outweighs the biodiversity value of the site. Now, I've not seen anything come forward from anyone to suggest what the actual need for this is. I'm surprised we haven't got anyone here from the applicant to actually sort of set that out and say, well, there's a need for this because it's mentioned that there's been overflow parking in the past, but we don't really know how often that has been, and we don't know what the demand's going to be in the future. So I'm concerned of extending out into the countryside for that purpose. There's also the mention of the concerns regarding the level crossing site. Now, there's lots of arguments, I suppose, whether this will increase, obviously it won't increase vehicle traffic, cars or anything like that, because they won't be able to use this. But I think it's suspected it will increase the number of cyclists using a level crossing, which has, as is mentioned in the report, has caused some concern in Rhys in the past, and there are ongoing concerns about the use of this level crossing. I know we need to support the issue of sustainable transport. We seem to have a conflict here. We've got a cycle path which would be sustainable, and yet we're having more car parking, and cars are not going to be sustainable in this sense. So I'm not at all happy with this application, and I don't think I can support it.
Thank you, Gordon. I've got Councillor Ben Gray wanting to come in next.
Thank you, Chair. I read the report. I can only imagine that the applicant was satisfied that the officers covered a lot of the points in recommending approval. If I'm honest, I'm surprised the member that called it in isn't here to discuss the application, as Councillor Davis has called it in for this committee to spend time looking at it, and is not here to debate it. So, on the basis of what I can see in the report and the reasons clearly stated for approving, I move off to recommendations.
Thank you, Ben. Is there anybody else wanting to come in? Ian, did you want to come back on those couple of points then, please?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Chair. In terms of whether there's a conflict between parking and cycling provision, I just think that is two different aspects of the development. Then to kind of look at them individually, really, the cycle path and the footway, to officers' mind, is just fundamentally an improvement to pedestrian and cycling infrastructure, which we don't see as anything other than a positive. There's no additional development at the leisure park, which means that there has to be additional parking. It's something, I think, for kind of convenience and to make parking at high demand times at the leisure park more easily dealt with. So I don't think it's really a conflict there. They're just different parts of the development. Network Rail, they are sensitive to developments near crossings. Personally, I think that formalising the route is probably a benefit in terms of the safety of the route as a whole. So I don't think there should be a negative impact there. Visual impact, there would be more impact than would be the case with the existing informally used route, but it's tight to a hedge. It's not very wide. It's not an arbitrary kind of intrusion, if you like, into the middle of a field. It's been kind of cited as sensitively as possible, and as with all applications, we're weighing the balance. So it's what is the visual impact of that versus the benefit of having an improvement to the network of cycleways and footways, particularly linking to the coastal path, and we see that as being decisively in favour of it rather than in along the lines of a harm. I think that's everything. But please, if Councillor Kent wants me to come back on anything else, please let me know.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Eddie Williams wanting to talk next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Haven't read the report, and I particularly like the linking actually between the train station and the park and the cycle path. It's all in line with our sustainability in future Wales, isn't it? So that's a good point on that. And it's considered all the additional things, like even the car park itself isn't going to be a mass tarmac place. It's going to be grasscrete, where it allows that to continue. So I'd just like to formally second the move from Councillor Gray.
Thank you very much, Eddie. Ian wants to come back on a point, please.
Yeah, sorry, I just picked up, there was one point I forgot to come back on, which was the ecology issue. In that policy where it says that the need for development should clearly outweigh the nature conservation value of the site, that would be a kind of applicable balance where there is harm to ecology and you're judging, is there a need for development which outweighs that harm? Well, in this case, there's not an identified harm, so it doesn't fall foul of that policy.
Super, thank you very much. Okay, we don't have anybody else wanting to come in, so as I know there is at least one dissenter, I will do a roll call vote again.
Chair, can I just ask, does Councillor Kemp need a seconder?
He does actually, yes.
Councillor Kent didn't move anything.
Oh yes, yes.
I didn't move anything.
Excuse me now, Margaret. No.
Right, that's all right.
Right, just so we all know where we are. Ben moved officers' recommendations. Eddie has seconded. So that's what we're voting on. We're voting on officers' recommendations, whether you are for or against them. So I'll start with myself, and I am for the officers' recommendation. It's Ben next.
4 officer recommendations.
Thank you. Rhiannon? Councillor Birch, Rhiannon?
You were off.
Muted,
You're off mute and muted yourself.
4.
Thank you. Sorry, we were. I was thinking, am I going deaf? Christine Cave, please.
Against.
Thank you. Pam Drake.
For officers' recommendations.
Thank you. Vince Driscoll.
Against.
Thank you. Stuart Edwards.
Abstain.
Thank you. Nick Hodges. Sorry.
4.
Thank you, Nick. Ian Johnson.
4.
Thank you. Gordon Kemp.
Against.
Thank you. Mike Morgan. Michael.
4.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Leighton Rowlands.
Against.
Thank you. Neil Thomas.
4.
Thank you. Margaret Wilkinson.
4.
Thank you. Eddie Williams.
4.
Thank you. Mark Wilson.
4.
And Margarita is absent. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 4. 4 against, 1 abstention. So clearly carried. Thank you on that one. So that moves us on to the next item. And it is Marcus who's going to do this. It's the farm building adjacent to Green Valley Farm Tranger, 2020-01516 full. Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is an application that's coming to you as it is submitted by a sitting councillor. So it would normally have been dealt with under delegated powers, but it's coming to you because of that reason. It's an application, and it's interesting because it's an application for a new 3-bedroom dwelling on the site, which is a site that's previously had consent for a new 3-bedroom dwelling. The details of the sizes are included within the report, so I won't go through that in great detail. The key issue here is that the previous approval was at a time when Tringith was part of a settlement, and therefore it was in a settlement boundary. That approval was just before the adoption of the new local development plan. So that was in 2017. The current planning application obviously has to be read in conjunction with the LDP, but the extant previous planning approval is a material consideration. So albeit that the site of Trehingath is no longer a settlement as defined by the LDP, the fact that the existing consent is in place is clearly very relevant. It is actually in a settlement which is surrounded by residential properties as well, which you can see from the aerial photo Ian's just flicked through. So, but the what we are intending and what we are recommending to you as in this planning report is that the consent is issued, but the consent is given the same length of time to be implemented as would have been the case of the previous 2017 permission. So that the two, if you like, there is no extension of the time left to implement it. One other point to note is that as a new dwelling in the rural Vale, there is a requirement to look at Section 106 and to make a financial provision for affordable housing, except in cases where they are self-build properties. And the applicant has agreed to sign up to that proviso. So that Section 106 agreement is included within the recommendation.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Marcus. Do we have anybody wanting to make a comment? No. Do we have anybody who is willing to make a proposal? Councillor Gray.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. On the basis that the officer recommendations are for approval, and this wouldn't have necessarily come here. Otherwise, I'm happy to move officer recommendations.
Thank you very much. I'm more than happy to second that. And yeah, that was what you were going to do, Ed. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So I don't see any hands up. We will go straight to the vote on this, and I will try and see if there are any dissenters. If anybody wants to go against officer's recommendation, please make some form of a gesture. Put your hand up, wave your hand. I don't see anybody. I think I'm more than happy that it is a unanimous decision on this. Okay, yeah. So that brings us to agenda item 6, which I do not have. There is no part 2, so therefore no part 7 either. That bids me to thank you all for attending, and I can't say have a safe journey home because you're all at home anyway, or the majority of you, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Cheers all.
Thank you, Chair. Happy Easter.
Thank you all.
Easter.
Goodbye.
Happy Easter.
Go easy.